The summer I turned 24, I took a job at a vineyard because I was broke. Not, I should probably stop ordering takeout broke. I mean checking my bank account before buying coffee, pretending I wasn't hungry because groceries had to last until Friday, and convincing myself that instant noodles counted as dinner if I added enough seasoning. My lease had just ended. The architecture firm where I'd worked as a junior designer had downsized, and I was one of the first people they let go. I told everyone it was a great opportunity to figure out what I really wanted. That sounded better than admitting I had absolutely no idea what came next. So when I found a seasonal job listing that offered housing, I applied before I could overthink it. Harvest assistant needed. No experience required. Housing included. The vineyard was 3 hours from the city, tucked into rolling hills that looked like they belonged on postcards rather than in real life. I figured I'd spend 3 months picking grapes, save enough money to get back on my feet, and leave. Simple. At least, that's what I believed while driving my ancient Honda along a winding country road, following faded wooden signs that all pointed towards Silver Creek Vineyard. The place was even bigger than the photos online. Rows and rows of grapevines stretched across the hills, disappearing into the distance like perfectly organized green waves. Beyond them stood a large stone farmhouse with white shutters, a weathered red barn, several smaller cottages for seasonal workers, and a winery building where a handful of tourists wandered with wine glasses in their hands. It looked expensive, the kind of place where people got married, the kind of place where everyone probably knew exactly what they were doing. I parked beside an old pickup truck and climbed out, suddenly aware that my duffel bag looked embarrassingly small compared to everyone else's luggage. A man in his 60s walked toward me from the main building. Tall, sunburned, hands that looked like they'd spent 40 years working outdoors. "You must be Holden." "Yeah." He offered a firm handshake. "I'm Richard." So this was the owner. His grip was solid enough to make me instinctively stand straighter. "Long drive." 3 hours. "You hungry?" "A little." "We'll feed you after I show you around." He spoke with the confidence of someone who never wasted words. No unnecessary small talk. No fake enthusiasm. Just calm certainty. I liked him immediately. He led me toward the cottages while explaining the schedule. "We start before sunrise." I figured. Summer gets hot. I don't mind mornings. You'll mind them after a week. That made me laugh. He smiled just enough for me to notice. The workers rotate jobs. Harvesting, pruning, irrigation, maintenance. Everyone helps where needed. I've never worked on a vineyard. You'll learn. He said it so matter-of-factly that I believed him. We stopped outside a small cottage painted pale gray. "This one's yours." It wasn't luxurious. Just clean. A narrow bed. Tiny kitchen. Bathroom. Desk. One window overlooking endless rows of vines. Honestly, it felt like a fresh start. "You'll meet everyone at dinner." Richard started walking away before turning back. "Oh, what? My son should be around somewhere." I nodded. "He's technically your supervisor." "Good to know." Richard's expression shifted into something almost amused. "You'll know him when you see him." Then he walked away. I unpacked my clothes, took a quick shower, and spent 20 minutes standing outside the cottage just staring at the vineyard. The silence surprised me. Not complete silence. Wind, birds, distant machinery, someone laughing somewhere across the property. But compared to the city, it felt unreal. Peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced for years. Maybe this summer wouldn't be so bad after all. Dinner was served in a converted barn that functioned as the workers' dining hall. Long wooden tables. Simple food. Around 20 seasonal employees. Most looked around my age. Some older. Everyone already seemed to know everyone else. I suddenly felt like the awkward new kid transferring schools halfway through the semester. A woman with curly brown hair waved me over. "You must be Holden." "That obvious?" "You've got the lost look." Everyone laughed. "I'm Emma." She introduced me around the table. "Louise. Ben. Noah. Sarah." Within 5 minutes, someone was asking where I was from. Someone else was explaining which chores were the worst, and another guy insisted I absolutely had to avoid the geese near the pond because they're meaner than they look. For the first time in weeks, I relaxed. Then the room changed. Not dramatically, just enough that conversations paused for half a second. Several people looked toward the entrance. I turned too. Someone had just walked inside. He was tall, dark blonde hair that looked slightly messy from working outside all day. Sun-tanned skin, jeans, faded green t-shirt, boots coated with dust. He couldn't have been older than 26. maybe 27. There wasn't anything flashy about him. No perfect movie star smile. No expensive clothes. But somehow, everyone noticed when he entered. Richard looked up from another table. There you are. Sorry. The newcomer grabbed a plate. Tractor broke down. Richard sighed. Again. Worse than yesterday. I'll look at it tomorrow. The younger man nodded. Then his eyes landed on me. Just briefly. Long enough to recognize I wasn't familiar. He walked over. This the new guy? Richard answered before anyone else could. Holden. Then he looked at me. My son. The man extended his hand. Adrian. His handshake was warm. Firm. Direct. Not intimidating. Just confident. Nice to meet you. You too. He studied me for exactly 1 second. You ever picked grapes before? No. You'll hate tomorrow. The table burst into laughter. I smiled. That's what your dad said. He was being polite. He sat down across from me. Someone asked him about a delivery. Someone else complained about broken irrigation lines. Within minutes, he was absorbed in conversation. But every now and then, I'd catch him glancing in my direction. Not staring, just checking, like he was quietly assessing the new employee. The alarm went off at 4:45 the next morning. I immediately regretted every life decision that had led me here. Outside, the air still carried the coolness of night. Workers gathered near the equipment shed with coffee cups in hand. Adrian stood beside a flatbed trailer, clipboard tucked under one arm. Completely awake. I hated him a little for that. He looked over the group. Morning. Several people groaned. He ignored them. We've got Block 7 today. He started assigning teams. When he reached my name. Holden. Yeah. You're with me. Emma smirked beside me. Good luck. Why? You'll see. Adrian tossed me a pair of pruning shears. Ever used these? No. Perfect. He started walking. I hurried after him. Rows of grapevines stretched endlessly ahead. Morning mist still clung to the hills. The rising sun painted everything gold. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. So, why a vineyard? I laughed. Because unemployment applications weren't working. He looked over. You serious? Pretty much. He nodded slowly. Honest answer. What about you? What about me? You always wanted to do this? He looked across the vineyard before answering. My family built this place. So yes, I never really considered doing anything else. There wasn't regret in his voice, just acceptance. Like he'd asked himself that question years ago and already made peace with the answer. We reached the first row. He demonstrated how to inspect grape clusters. What are we looking for? Ripeness. And if I mess up? You will. Comforting. You'll also learn. He smiled. It was small, easy to miss, but genuine. For the next hour, he patiently corrected every mistake I made. Too high. Too low. Wrong angle. Don't rush. Watch the stems. Leave those. Take these. I expected frustration. Instead, he explained everything without making me feel stupid. Around mid-morning, I accidentally dropped an entire crate. Grapes scattered everywhere. I stared in horror. Well, Adrian looked down at the mess. Then back at me. That's one way to harvest. I covered my face. I'm so fired. He laughed. Actually laughed. No. We've all done worse. You? My first week. He picked up a handful of grapes. I drove a tractor into the irrigation system. I blinked. Seriously? It took Dad 2 weeks to forgive me. That image was impossible to reconcile with the calm, capable man standing beside me now. For the first time that morning, I saw someone closer to my own age. Not just the owner's son. Not just my supervisor. Just Adrian. And somehow, that made the rest of the day a lot easier. By the end of my first week, every muscle in my body hurt. Not the dramatic kind of pain where you collapse onto the floor. Just the constant ache that reminded me every time I bent down, stood up, or reached for something that I had spent 10 hours working outdoors. I'd never appreciated office chairs more. Every evening, I returned to my little cottage covered in dust, took the longest shower possible, microwaved whatever leftovers I had, and was asleep before 10. It should have felt miserable. Instead, I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept so well. The days had a rhythm. Wake before sunrise. Coffee. Work until the afternoon heat became unbearable. Lunch under the shade of old oak trees. Back into the vineyard. Dinner. Sleep. There was something strangely satisfying about ending the day physically exhausted instead of mentally drained. Maybe that was why everyone seemed happier than people back in the city. Even when they complained. Especially when they complained. You're improving. I looked up from the vines. Adrian stood beside me with his clipboard. That's the first compliment you've given me. I've given you several. You've mostly pointed out everything I was doing wrong. Which means now you're doing fewer things wrong. I'll take it. He nodded toward the crate at my feet. You missed one cluster. I sighed dramatically. There it is. What? The criticism. He laughed under his breath. You'll survive. I wasn't so sure 5 seconds ago. Over the past week, we'd settled into an easy routine. He still supervised everyone, but somehow we kept ending up working near each other. Sometimes because he assigned us together. Sometimes because one of the other workers mysteriously volunteered to switch rows. Emma insisted it was because Adrian was the only patient teacher on the property. According to Luis, everyone else had simply learned to avoid training newcomers. Either way, I didn't mind. Adrian explained things without talking down to me. If I asked questions, he answered them. If I made mistakes, he corrected them without making me feel incompetent. It was refreshing. Lunch was everyone's favorite part of the day. The entire crew gathered beneath the trees overlooking the vineyard. Someone always brought a speaker. Someone else inevitably complained about the heat. Conversations bounced between ridiculous stories and practical jokes. I was halfway through a sandwich when Emma nudged me. So, thoughts? About? She looked across the field. Adrian was helping 2 workers repair a broken irrigation line. Your boss. I almost choked on my water. What about him? You spend a lot of time together. Because he keeps assigning me work. MHM. I narrowed my eyes. What are you implying? Nothing. She smiled. I just think it's interesting. Luis joined in immediately. Adrian doesn't usually train people this long. He trained me. For 2 days. He trained Ben. For 3. Emma looked back at me. You've been attached at the hip for a week. I rolled my eyes. I'm the slow learner. No. Ben shook his head. Trust me. On what? I was terrible. Everyone laughed. I nearly cut through irrigation tubing on my first day. So Adrian gave me a different job after 48 hours. I frowned. What exactly are you all trying to say? Emma shrugged innocently. Nothing. You keep saying nothing after saying something. Maybe he likes teaching. Luis snorted loudly. Adrian. Okay. Emma corrected herself. Maybe he likes teaching you. Before I could answer, Adrian walked over carrying a toolbox. What are we talking about? Emma smiled far too brightly. Holden. He looked at me. What about him? Nothing. She stood up immediately. We should get back to work. The others scattered suspiciously fast, leaving me alone with Adrian. He watched them leave. Should I be worried? I honestly don't know. He chuckled. Fair enough. Friday evening brought something unexpected. A thunderstorm. The sky darkened within minutes. Wind swept across the vineyard hard enough to bend the vines. Richard gathered everyone near the equipment shed. We need to secure everything. The next hour became organized chaos. Cover machinery. Tie down loose equipment. Move crates indoors. Rain started just as we finished. Not gentle rain. The kind that soaked you instantly. I sprinted toward the barn carrying a stack of empty baskets. Halfway there my foot slipped in the mud. I managed to stay upright. But the baskets flew everywhere. Oh, come on. Someone laughed. I looked up. Adrian. Standing beneath the barn roof, already soaked. You okay? My dignity isn't. He walked into the rain without hesitation and started collecting baskets. You know, I picked up another one. I'm beginning to think this place has something against me. The vineyard likes testing people. I think it's winning. He smiled. You stayed on your feet. Barely. Still counts. We carried the last baskets inside together. Rain hammered against the roof, so loudly conversation became difficult. For a few minutes we simply stood there watching the storm. The vineyard looked completely different in heavy rain. Darker. Almost mysterious. I love this weather. I looked at Adrian. Really? He nodded. When I was a kid, I'd sit right here with Dad. And we'd watch storms roll across the hills. He smiled at the memory. He always said the vineyard needed rain more than sunshine. Does it? Sometimes. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Just peaceful. Eventually he spoke again. You miss the city? I thought about it. The traffic. The noise. The endless rush. My friends. Only your friends. I nodded slowly. I don't think I miss much else. He looked surprised. You? He shrugged. I've never lived anywhere else. So you've never wondered? About leaving? Yeah. He watched rain slide from the roof. When I was 18. What happened? I drove to the city. And I stayed 3 days. You hated it? I didn't hate it. He smiled faintly. It just never felt like home. For reasons I couldn't explain. That answer stayed with me. Saturday afternoon was unusually quiet. Most tourists had left. The workers finished early because of the previous day's storm. I decided to walk. The vineyard seemed endless when you weren't working. Little gravel paths wound between rows of vines. Wildflowers grew along old fences. The air smelled faintly of earth and grapes warming in the sun. I eventually found myself near a small lake I hadn't noticed before. Someone was sitting on the dock. Adrian. Fishing rod beside him. Notebook in his lap. He looked up as I approached. Oh, am I interrupting? He closed the notebook. No. You fish. Not very successfully. I sat at the opposite end of the dock. Neither of us spoke for a minute. Then curiosity won. What were you writing? He glanced at the notebook. Just ideas. For what? The vineyard. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of ideas? He hesitated, then handed me the notebook. Inside weren't journal entries. They were sketches, new walking trails, event spaces, renovated buildings, outdoor seating areas. Handwritten notes filled every margin. Future harvest plans, wine tasting layouts, small concerts, community events. You drew all this? He nodded. This is incredible. He looked embarrassed. They're just ideas. No. I flipped another page. They're really good. You think. I'm an architect. He blinked. I forgot. You've got a good eye? He laughed softly. I've never shown anyone these. Why? He shrugged. Dad's practical. So, he worries about costs. That's reasonable. So, I mostly keep thinking. I looked back through the pages. The ideas weren't unrealistic. If anything, they respected everything already there. They just imagined what the vineyard could become. You should show him. Adrian smiled without much confidence. Maybe. No. I closed the notebook. You really should. For a long moment, he simply looked at me, not speaking, almost as if my opinion mattered more than it should have. Finally, he took the notebook back. Thanks. Something about the way he said it felt different. Quieter. More personal. That evening, Emma found me sitting outside my cottage. So, I groaned. I know that tone. What tone? The one that means you're about to ask an annoying question. She sat beside me. Did you know Adrian draws? I stared. How do you know that? I've worked here 4 summers. And I've never seen that notebook. I looked toward the vineyard. He showed it to me today. Emma became suspiciously quiet. What? He doesn't really share those ideas. Maybe it just came up. She smiled to herself. Maybe. Emma. Stop smiling like that. I didn't say anything. You don't have to. She stood. Just don't accidentally break his heart. I frowned. What? She waved over her shoulder while walking away. Good night, Holden. I watched her disappear toward the workers' cottages. Then I looked back across the dark vineyard. Near the main house, one upstairs window was still lit. For some reason, I found myself wondering if Adrian was still sitting at his desk, still sketching, still imagining what this place could become. And I realized something that should have worried me. I was starting to look for him without meaning to. The second week passed faster than the first. Somewhere between early mornings and long afternoons, the vineyard stopped feeling like a temporary job. It started feeling familiar. I knew which rows caught the first sunlight, which hills stayed cooler after rain, where Emma hid snacks during lunch breaks, which old tractor refused to start unless someone talked to it first. According to Luis, the tractor preferred compliments. According to Adrian, the engine was simply 20 years old. Luis insisted Adrian lacked imagination. Adrian insisted Luis had too much of it. Watching them argue had become one of my favorite parts of the day. Monday morning began with unexpected news. Richard gathered everyone outside the winery. We've got visitors this weekend. Someone groaned. Another worker asked, how many? About 100. The entire group fell silent. 100. Richard nodded. Private event. Wedding? No. Corporate retreat? No. He looked toward Adrian. Wine festival. Several workers exchanged looks. Emma quietly whispered beside me. This is either going to be amazing or terrible. Exactly. Richard continued. We'll need the property looking perfect. Adrian stepped forward with his clipboard. Everyone's assignments will change this week. That immediately earned complaints. No harvesting. We'll still harvest. He smiled patiently. But we'll also be cleaning, repairing, painting, landscaping, and pretending this place always looks this organized. That finally made everyone laugh. By some strange coincidence, my new assignment was working around the main house, specifically with Adrian. Again, Emma noticed immediately. You've got to be kidding. What? Nothing. She looked toward Adrian, then back at me. Absolutely nothing. I pointed a finger at her. You're impossible. I know. The morning was spent repainting old wooden fences. It wasn't difficult work, just repetitive. Adrian worked a few sections ahead of me. Every so often he'd look over. Don't miss the corners. I wasn't. You were. I was saving them. He laughed. Interesting strategy. Efficient. Questionable. By lunchtime, my hands were covered in white paint, including somehow my elbow. I stared at it. I genuinely don't know how that happened. Adrian looked over. You've also got some on your face. I instinctively touched my cheek. Worse. Other side. I tried again. Still wrong. I sighed dramatically. You could just tell me where. He stepped closer. Hold still. For one brief moment, he hesitated. Then he reached toward my face. His fingers stopped just short of touching me. Instead, he pointed. There. I wiped my cheek. He smiled. Close enough. For reasons I couldn't explain, my heart was beating faster than necessary. That afternoon, the temperature climbed past 90 degrees. Everyone worked slower. Nobody complained. There wasn't enough energy left. Around 3 o'clock, Adrian walked over carrying 2 bottles of cold water. He handed one to me. You look overheated. I feel overheated. You've been in the sun too long. I've been in the sun since 5 this morning. Fair point. We sat beneath an oak tree for a short break. The vineyard stretched below us in endless green rows. A breeze finally picked up. I closed my eyes. This is nice. It is. You always take breaks here? When I can. I looked over. You really love this place. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the hills like someone studying an old photograph. When I was little, he smiled. I used to think the vineyard went on forever. And now I know exactly where every row ends. That's less romantic. He laughed. It is. I leaned back against the tree. Were you always expected to take over? His expression became thoughtful. Nobody ever said it. But it was always understood. And you never wanted something different? He looked at his hands. I wanted choices. The answer surprised me. You don't have them? I do. He smiled quietly. I just figured out a long time ago which one I'd make. There was no bitterness. Just honesty. I don't regret staying. You just wish it had been your decision. His eyes met mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded. Exactly. That evening I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. The sketches. The ideas. Someone who drew future buildings because he genuinely cared about preserving the place. It made sense now. He hadn't stayed because he lacked ambition. He'd stayed because his ambition looked different from everyone else's. Wednesday brought another surprise. Richard asked me to help organize old storage rooms beneath the winery. The basement stayed cool even during the hottest afternoons. Dust covered nearly everything. Boxes, old barrels, shelves filled with decades of records. Richard opened one heavy wooden cabinet. My wife organized all this. I looked over. You don't anymore? He smiled sadly. She passed away. The words settled quietly between us. I'm sorry. It was several years ago. He carefully lifted an old photo album from the shelf. Still feels strange sometimes. He handed it to me. Inside were photographs spanning decades. Harvest festivals, construction, family dinners. Little Adrian sitting on a tractor that was clearly much too large for him. Another photo showed him covered in grape juice, grinning proudly, while Richard laughed beside him. You kept everything. Richard nodded. My wife believed photographs mattered. He paused. She was usually right. We continued sorting boxes in comfortable silence. Eventually, he spoke again. You've helped Adrian. I looked up. Me? He talks more. I blinked. I'm not sure that's because of me. It is. Richard smiled, without looking away from the old photographs. He keeps things to himself. I noticed. Always has. He carefully closed the album. He's a good son. I'm sure. But sometimes, Richard searched for the right words. He worries so much about taking care of everyone else that he forgets people can take care of him. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply listened. He doesn't make friends easily. I think everyone here likes him. They respect him. Richard corrected gently. There's a difference. That conversation stayed with me long after we finished working. The wine festival preparations consumed the next 2 days. Flower boxes appeared everywhere. Outdoor tables were polished. Lights were strung between old oak trees. The vineyard slowly transformed. Friday evening, after everyone finished, Emma stood in the middle of the courtyard. You know, she turned in a slow circle. It actually looks beautiful. Luis nodded. It always does. No. She smiled. This feels different. She was right. The place looked alive. As the others headed toward dinner, I stayed behind. The sunset painted the vineyard gold and deep orange. Someone walked up beside me. Adrian, you helped. Everyone helped. You noticed details. I looked at him. So did you. He smiled. I always do. For a while we simply stood there watching workers carry the last decorations into place. Then he spoke quietly. My mom loved festivals. I turned toward him. Really? She said vineyards shouldn't only make wine. What else? They should make memories. I smiled. I like that. So did she. The evening breeze carried the scent of lavender from the gardens nearby. Neither of us hurried to leave. I almost left once. The words caught me off guard. You mean moved away? He nodded. Right after college. What changed? He looked toward the main house. My mom got sick. I didn't interrupt. After that, he exhaled slowly. Leaving stopped feeling important. There was no self-pity in his voice. Only quiet acceptance. I'm glad you told me. He looked at me with a small, grateful smile. I don't usually. I know. He seemed surprised. You do? I think. I search for the right words. You only tell people things when you trust them. His eyes stayed on mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then someone shouted his name from across the courtyard. Adrian. He looked toward the sound. Coming. Before walking away, he glanced back at me. Thanks for listening, Holden. As he disappeared toward the winery, I remained where I was, watching the lights flicker on one by one across the property. The vineyard had been my escape from a life that had fallen apart. But without realizing it, it had become something else. Because somewhere between sunrise harvests, shared lunches, quiet conversations, and evenings watching the hills together, I had stopped looking forward to the end of summer. And that realization scared me far more than losing my job ever had. Saturday morning arrived before sunrise. By 5 o'clock the vineyard was already awake. Workers hurried between buildings carrying flower arrangements, folding chairs, signs, and crates of wine. The peaceful rhythm I'd gotten used to over the past few weeks had disappeared. Today, everything felt urgent. Emma walked past carrying 3 baskets at once. I changed my mind. About what? I hate festivals. The guests aren't even here yet. They will be. She disappeared into the winery. Louise followed moments later with a ladder balanced over one shoulder. Nobody panic. Are you panicking? No. He adjusted the ladder. But if I start running, you should probably run too. Adrian overheard him. Please don't scare the new people. Louise grinned. Too late. By mid-morning the vineyard looked transformed. White tents stood between the vines. String lights stretched from tree to tree. Fresh flowers lined the stone pathways. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers. It no longer looked like a working farm. It looked like somewhere people escaped to for a perfect weekend. I was carrying boxes of wine glasses toward the tasting pavilion when someone called my name. Holden. I turned. Richard stood near the entrance. You got a minute? Sure. He handed me a neatly folded button-up shirt. Dark green, embroidered with the vineyard's logo. Festival uniform. I looked down at my dusty work shirt. Probably an improvement. He smiled. I'd agree. When I returned 15 minutes later wearing the new shirt, Emma stared dramatically. Oh, what? You clean up surprisingly well. I took a shower. I noticed. Louise pointed toward Adrian. I think someone else noticed too. Before I could ask what he meant, Adrian walked over carrying a clipboard. He stopped for half a second. His eyes moved from my shoes to my face. Then he nodded once. Looks good. 3 simple words. Nothing unusual. Except, Emma immediately looked away to hide a smile. I frowned. What? Nothing. You've all been saying nothing for 2 weeks. Exactly. The first guests arrived shortly before noon. Couples. Families. Groups of friends. People wandering between vineyards with cameras and wine glasses. Everyone seemed relaxed. Happy. Curious. Adrian moved effortlessly through the crowd, greeting returning visitors by name, answering questions, helping employees. checking supplies. He somehow managed to be everywhere at once. Watching him work was impressive. He never looked rushed, even when he clearly had 10 things happening simultaneously. Around 1 o'clock, a woman approached me. "This place is beautiful." "It really is. Are you family?" I almost laughed. "No. You seem comfortable here." I looked across the vineyard. Adrian was explaining the harvest process to a small group of tourists. "I guess." I smiled to myself. "I'm getting there." Later that afternoon, I found Adrian replacing one of the wooden signs near the walking trail. "You need help?" "I've got it." I grabbed the other side anyway. Together, we lifted the sign into place. He looked over. "Thanks." "You're welcome." We stepped back to examine it. Straight. Level. Perfect. "Looks better." It does. For a moment, neither of us moved. Guests wandered past laughing. Someone nearby played acoustic guitar. Children ran between picnic tables. The whole vineyard buzzed with quiet happiness. Adrian watched them for a while. "My mom would have loved today." I smiled. I was just thinking she'd probably be proud. He looked at me. "You think?" "I know almost nothing about her." I admitted. "But..." I looked around. Everyone still talks about her. His expression softened. "She made people feel welcome." "I can tell." He looked across the festival. "Dad built the vineyard, and she built everything around it." He nodded slowly. "Exactly." The busiest part of the afternoon came during the vineyard tours. Adrian led one group, Richard another. I was assigned to help answer questions along the walking trail. Most visitors wanted to know about grapes, harvests, weather, wine. One little girl had entirely different priorities. "Do you have horses?" "No." "Goats?" "No." "Any animals?" I thought for a moment. "Several very unfriendly geese." Her eyes widened. "Really? They're basically security guards." She laughed. "I want to see them." Her parents apologized. I shrugged. "Honestly, everyone wants to see them." From somewhere behind me, Adrian laughed. I turned. I wasn't lying. "You definitely exaggerated." I absolutely did. The little girl looked between us. "Are you brothers?" Both of us answered at the same time. "No." The timing made everyone laugh. The girl looked suspicious. "You sound like brothers." Adrian smiled. "I've been told worse." As evening approached, the festival became quieter. Most families had left. Adults lingered beneath the string lights with glasses of wine. Music floated across the hills. Golden sunlight slowly faded into soft orange. The vineyard looked almost magical. I was collecting empty glasses when the live band finished their final song. Applause echoed across the property. Richard thanked everyone for coming. Guests gradually began leaving. By 9 o'clock, only employees remained. Emma collapsed onto a nearby bench. "I can't feel my feet." Louise dropped beside her. "I don't think I have feet anymore." Someone handed around leftover food. Another person turned the music back on. Much quieter this time. The atmosphere changed instantly. The work was over. Now it simply felt like friends sitting together after a very long day. "I'll be back." Adrian stood from the table. "Forgot something in the winery." Without really thinking, I stood too. "I'll help." "You don't have to." "I know." He smiled. "Okay." The winery was peaceful without visitors. The tasting room sat empty. Glasses neatly stacked. Candles still burning softly. Adrian disappeared into the storage room. I wandered toward the large windows overlooking the vineyard. The hills shimmered beneath hundreds of tiny lights. It never gets old. I turned. Adrian had returned carrying a small wooden box. "What doesn't?" "This view." He joined me beside the window. "My mom used to stand here after every festival. And she'd wait until everyone went home." He smiled at the memory. "Then she'd say the vineyard sounded happiest after people left." I listened quietly. "Why?" "Because it was resting." Outside, the wind moved gently through the vines. The sound reached us even through the glass. Soft, steady, peaceful. I think she was right. So do I. Neither of us moved away from the window. It felt strangely easy to stand there in silence. Comfortable. Like conversation wasn't always necessary. Finally, Adrian opened the wooden box. Inside were dozens of old photographs. "My mom kept these here." He handed me one. It showed a much younger Richard. Beside him stood a smiling woman holding the hand of a little blond boy who couldn't have been older than 6. Tiny Adrian, covered in dirt, missing one front tooth. I laughed. "You look exactly the same." "I definitely don't." "You still make that face." "What face?" "Like you're trying to solve a problem nobody else noticed." He stared at the photograph, then at me. I do, don't I? You absolutely do. He laughed quietly. I've never noticed. We continued flipping through photographs together. Harvests, birthdays, family dinners, winter snow covering empty vineyards, summer festivals much smaller than today's. Every picture carried the same feeling. Home. Eventually, Adrian carefully returned them to the box. I should probably put these away. Before closing it, he hesitated, then removed one photograph. This one's a duplicate. He handed it to me. The same picture of the vineyard taken years earlier at sunset. You sure? He nodded. I think my mom would have liked someone else keeping it. I looked at the photograph, then back at him. Thank you. He smiled. You're welcome. When we finally walked back outside, the others were already cleaning up. Emma looked from me to Adrian, then to the photograph in my hand. She didn't say anything. She simply smiled to herself before returning to stacking chairs. Later that night, after everyone headed home, I placed the photograph on the small desk inside my cottage. It didn't match anything else in the room. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't particularly remarkable. But somehow, it became the first thing I looked at before going to sleep. Lying awake that night, I realized the lines I'd carefully tried not to cross were beginning to blur. Adrian wasn't just my supervisor anymore. He wasn't only the owner's son. He had become the person I looked for first every morning, and the last person I thought about before falling asleep. I still told myself it was only friendship. I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. The morning after the festival was unusually quiet. No visitors, no music, no hurried footsteps across the courtyard. Just the familiar sounds of the vineyard waking up. For the first time in days, everyone seemed relaxed. Even Richard. He stood outside the winery with a mug of coffee, watching the sunrise over the hills. When Adrian joined him a few moments later, they talked quietly while looking across the vines. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I noticed something I hadn't before. They didn't need many words. Years of working together had created a kind of silent understanding between them. A nod, a glance, a small gesture toward one of the fields. That was enough. It made me think about my own father. We hadn't spoken in almost 4 months. Not because we'd argued. Life had simply become busy. The realization sat heavily with me all morning. Holden. I looked up. Adrian was standing beside the truck. We're heading into town. For supplies? He nodded. You coming? I glanced toward Richard. He already approved it. Apparently the decision had been made without me. Sure. The nearest town was only 20 minutes away. Small. Quiet. One main street. A bakery. Hardware store. Local grocery. Coffee shop. The kind of place where people greeted each other by name. As soon as we parked, 3 different people waved at Adrian. Morning. Hey, Adrian. How's your dad? He answered every greeting with the same easy smile. You know everyone. Most people. That seems exhausting. He laughed. It has advantages. Like what? The bakery owner always saves the last cinnamon rolls. Okay. I nodded seriously. That is a significant advantage. He smiled. I thought you'd understand. We spent nearly an hour picking up supplies. Garden tools. Cleaning products. Boxes of glassware. Replacement light bulbs. Nothing exciting. But somehow, it didn't feel like running errands. Conversation came easily now. Without awkward pauses. Without searching for topics. At one point we stopped outside the hardware store while waiting for someone to load fencing materials into the truck. Across the street, an elderly man raised a hand. Morning, Adrian. Morning, Mr. Dawson. The older man looked at me. You knew? I've been here a couple weeks. He keeping you busy? I looked toward Adrian. He tries. Mr. Dawson laughed loudly. He learned that from his father. As the man continued down the sidewalk, I noticed Adrian smiling to himself. What? I've known him my whole life. So, he still asks me the same question every time. Which one? Keeping busy? I grinned. What do you usually say? The truth. And I always am. Before returning to the vineyard, Adrian stopped in front of a small coffee shop. You want coffee? I thought we were working. We are. He checked his watch. We've got 10 minutes. Inside, the cafe smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee. Only a handful of customers sat near the windows. The woman behind the counter smiled the moment Adrian walked in. The usual? He nodded, then looked at me. What do you drink? Iced coffee. She laughed. City boy. I raised an eyebrow. I've been exposed. A few minutes later we carried our drinks outside. Instead of heading straight to the truck, Adrian walked toward a small park overlooking the river. There were only 2 benches. He sat on one. I joined him. For a while we simply watched the water move beneath the old bridge. You come here often? When I need to think. And does it help? Sometimes. I took a sip of coffee. You think a lot. I've been told. I can believe it. He looked amused. What does that mean? I don't think you've ever made a quick decision. He considered that. You're probably right. You analyze everything. I prefer careful. I prefer overthinking. He laughed. Fair. For a moment his expression became thoughtful again. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you miss architecture? The question surprised me. I thought I would. And now? I watch the river. I think I miss the idea of it. He waited. I spent years believing that was my future. But I don't know anymore. Saying it out loud felt strangely relieving. I've been afraid that not missing it means I've wasted years. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. I don't think learning something you loved can be a waste. I looked at him. What if I never go back? Then maybe it prepared you for something else. Simple words. Yet somehow, they settled something inside me. The drive back to the vineyard felt different. Comfortable. Windows down. Warm summer air filling the truck. A playlist played softly through old speakers. At one point I recognized the song. You like this band? He glanced over. You do too. I've listened to them since college. No way. I had every album. So did I. That somehow turned into an hour-long discussion about music. Favorite concerts. Songs we'd listened to during difficult times. Albums we'd secretly loved despite pretending otherwise. When we finally reached the vineyard, Emma was waiting beside the equipment shed. She looked from me, to Adrian, to the truck, then folded her arms. You two look suspiciously cheerful. We bought fertilizer. Adrian answered. And fence posts. I added. Emma narrowed her eyes. I don't think that's the reason. That evening the workers gathered near the pond after dinner. Someone built a small fire. Not because it was cold, just because people liked sitting around it. Luis was telling a story that became less believable with every sentence. And then the goose chased the mailman all the way to the road. No. Emma laughed. It absolutely happened. It absolutely didn't. Richard walked past carrying firewood. It actually did. Luis pointed triumphantly. See, I've underestimated the geese. I admitted. You definitely have. Adrian sat down beside me. Not close enough to seem unusual. Just beside me. The conversation drifted from one topic to another. Someone asked about vacation plans. Another talked about college. Eventually Emma turned toward Adrian. You ever taking a vacation? He smiled. I leave sometimes. Where? The hardware store. Everyone laughed. I'm serious. So am I. Richard shook his head from across the fire. He's impossible. I learned from you. Unfortunately, for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw them not as owner and manager, but simply as father and son, teasing each other, laughing, comfortable. It was impossible not to smile. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I decided to walk back through the vineyard before going to bed. The air had cooled. Crickets filled the silence. The moon cast pale light across the endless rows of vines. I heard footsteps behind me. Couldn't sleep? I turned. Adrian. Not yet. He nodded. I do this too. We continued walking side by side. No destination. Just following the gravel path between the vineyards. Eventually we reached the highest hill on the property. From there, almost everything was visible. The winery, the cottages, the main house, the distant lights of town. It's beautiful, I said quietly. It always is. We stood there for several minutes. Neither of us speaking. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Finally Adrian broke it. Can I ask you something? You already did once today. I'm asking again. I smiled. Go ahead. He looked out across the vineyard instead of at me. When summer ends. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Are you going back to the city? The question hung between us. Longer than either of us expected. I don't know. It was the only honest answer. I used to think I was. And now, I looked across the hills that had somehow started feeling like home. I'm not sure where home is anymore. For the first time that evening, he turned toward me. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away. I've been hoping you'd say that. His voice was barely above a whisper. The words caught me completely off guard. Before I could answer, voices echoed faintly from the courtyard below. Someone was calling Adrian's name. The moment broke. He took one small step back. We should probably head down. Yeah. We walked back in silence. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. As we reached the cottages, he stopped. "Good night, Holden." "Good night." He hesitated for the briefest second, as if he wanted to say something else. Instead, he smiled, then disappeared toward the main house. I watched him until he was out of sight. Only then did I go inside. Sleep didn't come easily that night, not because of what had happened, but because of what almost had. And somewhere deep down, I knew summer had quietly become more than a season. It had become a turning point neither of us could pretend not to see anymore. I started avoiding Adrian. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't trust myself. The conversation on the hill kept replaying in my head. "I've been hoping you'd say that." He hadn't said anything inappropriate. Neither had I. But those words had stayed with me far longer than they should have. So the next morning, when work assignments were posted, I volunteered to help Luis repair irrigation lines on the opposite side of the property. Emma noticed immediately. "Interesting." "What?" "You volunteered." "I can volunteer." "You usually don't." I felt motivated. She looked across the yard. Adrian was reading through supply invoices with Richard. Then she looked back at me. "MHM." By lunchtime, I realized avoiding someone on a vineyard was almost impossible. There were only so many paths, only so many buildings, only one dining hall. Twice our eyes met across the rows of vines. Each time we both smiled politely. Each time one of us looked away first. It felt wrong, not dramatic, just unfamiliar. Late that afternoon, Richard found me repairing an old fence. "You've got a minute?" "Of course." He leaned against the fence post beside me. "I need a favor." "What kind?" "I'm driving into the city tomorrow." I nodded. "Adrian's got meetings here. So, I need someone to help him check the North Vineyard." I almost laughed at the timing. "Me? You've learned fast." "I still make mistakes." "So does he." Richard smiled. "You'll be fine." There wasn't really a reason to refuse. So I didn't. The next morning started in complete silence. Adrian loaded tools into the truck. I carried water and supplies. Neither of us mentioned the awkwardness that had settled between us. Finally, halfway to the North Vineyard, he spoke. "Did I do something?" I looked over. "What?" "You've been avoiding me." Straightforward. No accusation. Just curiosity. For a second, I considered pretending I hadn't noticed. Instead, I wasn't trying to. "You were." "I know." He kept his eyes on the road. "Why?" The honest answer sat on the tip of my tongue. "Because I'm starting to like you. Because I don't know if I'm imagining things. Because you're my supervisor, and this is probably a terrible idea." Instead, I settled for something safer. "I've been thinking about my future." He nodded slowly. "I can understand that." Silence returned. But this time, it felt lighter. The North Vineyard sat farther from the main buildings than anywhere else on the property. Quieter, less traveled. The rows stretched across gentle hills bordered by old oak trees. Only the sound of insects filled the warm morning air. We spent hours checking vines damaged by the recent storm, replacing broken supports, inspecting irrigation. It was peaceful work. At one point, I looked up to find Adrian watching the landscape instead of the vines. "What?" He smiled faintly. "I forget sometimes." "What?" "To stop working long enough to actually look at this place." I followed his gaze. The hills rolled endlessly beneath the summer sky. "You really love it." "I do." "You've never doubted staying?" He thought for a moment. "I've doubted myself. But not this place." "No." His answer came immediately. Around noon, the heat became unbearable. We took shelter beneath a large oak tree overlooking the valley. I stretched out on the grass with a bottle of water. "My back officially hates me." "It gets easier." "You've been saying that for 3 weeks." "It keeps being true." I laughed. "You know?" I looked toward him. "When I first got here, I thought you were intimidating." He seemed genuinely surprised. "Me?" "You barely smiled." "I smile." "Now you do." I smiled then. "Rarely." He looked offended in the most harmless way possible. "I'll have you know I smiled twice that first day." "Exactly." That made him laugh. I was nervous. I blinked. "You? You were new." "I'm still not following." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Dad usually hires people who already know vineyard work. And I was worried I'd be bad at teaching." The admission caught me completely off guard. "You hit it well." "I don't think I did." "You really did." He smiled to himself. I guess we were both pretending. Apparently. The conversation drifted naturally after that. College. Childhood. Favorite books. Music. Old dreams we'd quietly outgrown. I found myself telling him things I hadn't planned to. About losing my job. About how embarrassed I'd been to move into a tiny cottage after living in an apartment downtown. About feeling like everyone else my age had their lives figured out. They don't. He said it so confidently that I laughed. You sound sure. I am. What makes you think that? I meet hundreds of people every year. He leaned back against the tree. The older I get, he smiled, the more I realize everyone's improvising. That sentence stayed with me. Because somehow, I believed him. We finished work later than expected. Instead of driving directly back, Adrian turned onto a narrow dirt road. I looked over. Wrong way. I know. Where are we going? You'll see. 5 minutes later, the truck stopped beside a hill overlooking almost the entire valley. There wasn't another building in sight. Only vineyards, fields, distant mountains. I come here sometimes. He climbed out. When things get loud, I followed him. Wind moved through the tall grass. Clouds drifted lazily overhead. It was impossibly quiet. I didn't know this place existed. Most people don't. We stood side by side looking across the landscape. Finally, I spoke. I've been thinking about what you said. He looked over. Which part? About everyone improvising. He smiled. I stand by it. I think. I took a slow breath. I came here believing my life had fallen apart. And now, I looked across the vineyards below. Now I think maybe it just changed direction. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Quiet, thoughtful, almost relieved. I'm glad. His voice was soft, genuinely glad. Something shifted inside me. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough that pretending became impossible. I've changed too, I admitted. He held my gaze. I know. The wind carried the scent of warm earth through the grass. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Finally, Adrian took a slow breath. Holden. There was uncertainty in his voice for the first time since I'd met him. Real uncertainty. I don't want to make things complicated. You won't. I might. He smiled nervously. I've been trying very hard not to. My heartbeat sped up. So have I. Silence settled between us. Different this time. Full of words neither of us had spoken. I look for you every morning. He admitted quietly. I know. You do? I look for you too. His shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. I wasn't sure. I wasn't either. A small laugh escaped both of us at almost the same time. The tension broke. Not completely. Just enough to breathe again. I don't know what happens after summer. I said honestly. Neither do I. But I looked at him. I'd regret never telling you this. He waited. Every instinct told me to be careful. Professional. Reasonable. Instead, I like being with you. The words were simple, but they felt enormous. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, he was smiling. Not the polite smile I'd seen during work. Not the amused smile he wore around the crew. Something quieter. Warmer. I was hoping that wasn't only me. Neither of us stepped closer. Neither of us reached for the other. We simply stood there smiling like two people who had finally stopped pretending not to understand what had been growing between them all summer. Eventually, Adrian looked toward the lowering sun. We should head back. Probably. As we climbed into the truck, everything felt different. Nothing had officially changed. And yet, everything had. For the first time since arriving at Silver Creek Vineyard, I wasn't wondering what would happen when summer ended. I was wondering whether there might be a reason to stay. The next few days felt lighter. Not because anything had changed on the surface. If someone had watched us from a distance, they wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. We still worked. Still joked with everyone during lunch. Still kept a respectful distance whenever other employees were around. But now, there was no uncertainty. No wondering whether I had imagined the quiet moments between us. No convincing myself I was reading too much into a smile. The feelings were real. Both of us knew it. And somehow, simply knowing that made everything easier. Monday morning began with another sunrise over the hills. I stepped outside my cottage carrying a mug of coffee. Someone was already standing near the equipment shed. Adrian. He looked up the moment he heard my footsteps. For just a second, our eyes met. Nothing dramatic happened. He simply smiled. A real smile. Without thinking, I smiled back. Emma appeared behind me carrying gloves. She looked from me to Adrian, then back to me. Well, what? Nothing. I laughed. You've been saying that for weeks. And one day you'll thank me. I'm beginning to doubt that. She grinned. I don't. Work that morning took us to the western edge of the vineyard. The crew split into smaller groups. Luis disappeared with 2 tractors. Emma helped prepare crates for the next harvest. Richard met with suppliers. By pure coincidence, Adrian and I ended up repairing an old fence together. Again, I think this fence secretly hates us, I said while replacing a weathered board. It definitely prefers falling apart. I respect the commitment. He laughed. You say strange things. I've always said strange things. I've noticed. For a while we worked quietly. Eventually he glanced toward the distant hills. I talked to Dad. My hands paused. About the festival. And he liked the ideas. The notebook. He nodded. He wants to renovate one of the old buildings this winter. I smiled immediately. Seriously? Seriously. Adrian. I couldn't hide how genuinely happy I felt. That's amazing. He looked at me instead of the fence. I probably wouldn't have shown him without you. The words stayed with me long after we returned to work. That afternoon, the heat drove everyone toward the shade during lunch. Luis was halfway through another unbelievable story. So naturally, I challenged the goose. Emma buried her face in her hands. There it is. What? The part where everyone stops believing you. It happened. Richard walked by carrying paperwork. It actually happened. Emma sighed dramatically. I hate that this keeps happening. The entire table laughed. I looked across at Adrian. He was already looking at me. For just a heartbeat. Then we both looked away. Emma noticed. Of course she noticed. She kicked my boot gently beneath the table. I ignored her. She kicked it again. What? I whispered. She smiled without looking at me. Nothing. That evening the workers gathered outside after dinner. Someone had brought an old projector. A white sheet was hung between 2 trees. Movie night. Apparently, it had become a tradition years earlier. People dragged chairs across the grass. Blankets appeared. Popcorn somehow materialized from nowhere. I found a seat beside Luis. A minute later, Adrian walked over. You mind? Luis looked at the empty chair beside me. Then at Adrian. Then slowly stood up. You know? He stretched dramatically. I suddenly remembered I promised Emma I'd help her. Emma looked confused. You did? I absolutely did. Before either of us could react, he'd disappeared, leaving one empty chair. Adrian looked after him. That wasn't subtle. Not even a little. He sat down anyway. The movie started. Some old comedy almost everyone had apparently seen before. People quoted lines before the actors said them. Laughed at jokes they already knew. Half the entertainment came from watching everyone else enjoy it. At one point I leaned closer. I don't understand. What? How does everyone know every line? We've watched this every summer for years. You never told me. I assumed someone else would. I was beginning to think I was the only person who hadn't seen it. You are. I knew it. He smiled. You'll survive. The movie ended close to midnight. People slowly wandered back toward their cottages. Someone yawned loudly. Emma stretched. I'm officially exhausted. You've been saying that every night. Luis reminded her. Because it's true every night. Richard wished everyone good night before heading toward the main house. Soon only Adrian and I remained near the empty screen. We should probably clean this up tomorrow. He looked around. Yeah. Neither of us moved. The vineyard had become completely quiet again. Moonlight spilled across the rows of vines. The projector clicked softly as it cooled. I like nights after everyone's gone, I said. He smiled. My mom used to say the same thing. I remember. We started walking without really deciding where. The familiar gravel path led us away from the cottages, toward the vineyards, toward the quiet. You know, Adrian said after a while. I was terrified the day you arrived. I laughed. I've heard this before. No. He smiled. Not because of teaching. What then? He took a slow breath. I thought you'd leave. I frowned. I had just met you. I know. Then why? He looked embarrassed. I've watched people come and go every summer. He kicked a small stone off the path. Most never really care about this place. And you did. His voice became quieter. Almost immediately. I wasn't sure what to say, so I told him the truth. It was easy. Why? I looked around us. Because everyone here cared. I smiled. Especially you. He looked away for a second. I've been trying not to hope. I understood exactly what he meant. I know. We reached the small lake where I'd first found him sketching weeks earlier. The dock was empty. Water reflected the stars almost perfectly. I haven't been here in a while. He said. You've been busy. So have you. We sat at opposite ends of the dock, just like the first time. Except now, The silence felt completely different. I've been thinking about after harvest. He admitted. So have I. My biggest fear. He looked across the lake. Is pretending this never happened. I answered immediately. I don't want that either. He nodded. I wasn't sure. I smiled softly. I'm pretty sure about one thing. What? I don't want to lose whatever this is. He looked at me then, long enough that the rest of the world seemed to disappear. I don't either. The words came so naturally that neither of us questioned them. For a while we simply watched the water ripple gently beneath the moonlight. Then Adrian spoke again. Can I ask you one more question? You've asked a lot lately. I know. I smiled. Go ahead. He hesitated. Longer than usual. When the season ends. His voice was almost lost beneath the sound of crickets. Would you stay a little longer? Not forever. Not a promise. Just a little longer. I looked across the vineyard that had slowly become part of my life. Then back at him. I think. I smiled. I'd like that. Relief spread across his face before he could hide it. It was small, quiet, completely genuine. And somehow, seeing that expression made my answer feel even more certain. We walked back toward the cottages together, still talking about autumn, about renovation plans, about the possibility of planting another section of vines next spring. It struck me halfway down the path that we were speaking about the future. Not carefully, not hypothetically, naturally, as though neither of us could imagine that this conversation would simply end with summer. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. And somehow, that was even better. Harvest ended on a cool September morning. The change had been gradual. The vineyards were quieter now. Most of the grapes had already been picked. The endless rows that had kept everyone busy for weeks suddenly looked calm, almost as if they were finally allowed to rest. Exactly the way Adrian's mother had once described them. The season was ending, and for the first time since arriving at Silver Creek Vineyard, I wasn't ready to leave. The seasonal workers began packing one by one. Suitcases appeared outside cottages. Cars were loaded. Goodbyes echoed across the property. Luis hugged everyone like he was leaving forever. Emma cried twice, then insisted she wasn't crying. It's allergies. In September? Luis asked. Very aggressive allergies. Richard laughed. You'll all be back next year. Emma wiped her eyes. We better be. That afternoon we shared one last dinner together. Not because anyone planned it. It simply happened. Long wooden tables were pushed together. Someone grilled vegetables. Someone opened a few bottles from the vineyard. Stories were repeated for the 100th time. The broken tractor. The festival. The famous geese. My very first crate of grapes scattered across the ground. I still remember your face. Adrian laughed. I thought I was fired. You looked absolutely terrified. I was. Everyone laughed. Even Richard. You've improved. He looked at me. A lot. Thanks. You worked hard. Those 3 words meant more than he probably realized. Later that evening, people slowly drifted away. Emma hugged me tightly. You'd better visit. I will. I'm serious. So am I. She smiled knowingly. I think you'll have a reason. Before I could answer, she glanced toward Adrian, who was helping Richard carry chairs back into storage. Then she looked at me again. I was right. About what? She laughed. You'll figure it out. The vineyard grew quiet once more. Only a handful of cottages still had lights on. Most of the seasonal workers were leaving before sunrise. I walked through the rows of vines one last time, trying to memorize everything. The smell of the earth, the cool evening air, the sound of leaves moving in the breeze. Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't need to turn around. I thought I'd find you here. Adrian, I figured you might. He stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. There didn't seem to be any need. Finally, he broke the silence. So, tomorrow. He smiled faintly. We're both terrible at starting difficult conversations. I've noticed. We continued walking slowly between the vines. I'm scared, he admitted. It was the first time I'd ever heard him say those words. What about? He looked ahead. That you'll leave. The honesty in his voice left no room for pretending. I took a slow breath. I almost did. He looked at me. What changed? I smiled. You. The answer came so naturally that it surprised both of us. He stopped walking. So did you. The evening breeze carried the scent of grapes through the vineyard. Everything else seemed to disappear. I've been trying to imagine going back. I continued quietly. Back to the city. And it doesn't feel like home anymore. His eyes never left mine. I don't know exactly what comes next, I admitted. But I laughed softly. I know I don't want this summer to become one of those stories people tell themselves years later. The ones that start with, he smiled. What if? Exactly. Adrian looked down for a moment before speaking again. Dad offered you a job. I blinked. What? He wanted to wait until after harvest. I didn't know. He wasn't sure what you wanted. I stared at him. A real job. He nodded. Year-round. Working on renovations. Helping with future expansion. Events. Design. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I laughed in disbelief. I thought I'd have to start job hunting next week. You still can, he said gently, if that's what you want. I looked across the vineyard, toward the winery, the cottages, the hills that had slowly become familiar. Then back at him. I think. I smiled. I've already found what I was looking for. The next morning dawned bright and cool. Cars pulled away one after another. Workers waved through open windows. Promises to return next summer filled the air. Eventually, only a few people remained. Richard walked toward me carrying 2 coffee mugs. I hear Adrian told you. He did. Richard handed me one. No pressure. I know. If you want to leave. He smiled kindly. I'll understand. I looked across the vineyard. Then toward Adrian, who was repairing a gate a short distance away. He looked up at exactly the same moment. Our eyes met. He smiled. That same quiet smile I'd started looking for every morning. I smiled back. Then I turned toward Richard. I'd like to stay. Richard didn't seem surprised. I hoped you'd say that. He extended his hand. I shook it. Welcome to Silver Creek. Life settled into a new rhythm over the following months. Tourists came and went. Autumn painted the vineyards gold. The renovation plans Adrian had sketched for years finally began taking shape. And somehow, without ever making a grand announcement, we simply became part of each other's everyday lives. We worked together, shared morning coffee before the crews arrived, spent evenings walking the same quiet paths through the vineyard, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes not saying anything at all. Neither of us felt the need to rush anything. Whatever had begun that summer had been built slowly, patiently, the same way vineyards grow, season after season. The following spring, the first visitors arrived for another festival. The renovated tasting terrace was finally finished. Flower boxes overflowed with color. Music drifted across the hills once again. I stood near the entrance watching guests admire everything we'd spent months building. It turned out exactly the way you imagined, I said. Adrian looked around the vineyard. No. What do you mean? He smiled. It turned out better. I followed his gaze. Families laughed beneath the oak trees. Friends wandered between the vines. Children pointed excitedly toward the pond. The vineyard was full of life. Exactly as his mother had wanted. Exactly as he'd dreamed. After a long silence, he looked at me. You know? What? The funny thing is. He smiled. I spent years believing I was waiting for the right season. And it wasn't a season. He looked directly into my eyes. It was a person who happened to arrive one summer. I couldn't help laughing. That's a much better ending. He nodded. I think so too.